Hello, welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Suicide Squad from 2021. Now, this is not a film I intended to review on this channel. Generally speaking, let me step that back. None of these are reviews, and I stand by that. It's not a movie I intended to talk about on this channel, and in general, I don't intend to talk about a lot of, particularly mainstream Hollywood blockbuster type things. But this hit me in a different kind of way, and I thought it warranted talking about. This will also help me wrap up a whole lot of thoughts I have about Hollywood blockbusters and the MCU and the DCEU and all these other things that are sort of normally outside the scope of what I want to do with this series. So, The Suicide Squad, if you're watching this in a contemporary context, you probably have some context for what the DCEU has been like for the last couple of years and how it's been clashing with the MCU, those being the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC. Why is it called the DCEU? I don't even know. It's the DC Cinematic Universe. I think is it DC Extended? It doesn't fucking matter. Anyway, the MCU has generally been graded as good, and the DCEU has generally been graded as bad. What is fascinating about before we get into that, the reason why I want to talk about this, and why I didn't think I was going to, but I'm going to anyway, is because I think I kind of love this movie. It does it does a ton of stuff I did not expect it to do. I was fully going into this expecting that it was going to be yet another superhero film that lots of people were praising. It's only just come out, so it's sort of the initial responses right now. But generally, it's been getting positive reviews over the last couple of days, and I was really expecting I was going to watch it. It was going to be kind of middle of the road. I was going to have a slightly worse view of it than most people, as tends to be with the case with most of the Marvel or DC or really all Hollywood blockbusters. I generally tend to grade lower than most people, and I'm kind of blown away by it. It's not perfect. It's not even great cinema, but it is a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. I only finished watching it 15 minutes ago, as I usually do with these things. So it's really just sort of off-the-cuff responses. But part of the reason I want to talk about this is not just the fact that I was surprised I enjoyed it, but also I want to talk about the context around it and the people who are involved. So as we know, or as you are probably aware, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been getting a lot of praise for doing a lot of things really well. Although the fact that Scarlett Johansson just sued the shit out of Disney for breach of contract is hilarious to me, and I hope she wins, because fuck those guys. And the DC Cinematic Universe has been an abject disaster, and I'm all on board with that. I could spend multiple hours talking about all that. If I ever talk about it, it'll be its own video, and I'll sit here and just rant. Maybe I'll do a live stream or something like that. That would be stupid. Just speak into the air. Anyway, I just get drunk and mumble for 4 hours. Anyway, the DC Cinematic Universe has mostly been a mess. Even the ones that people have been grading higher, I have tended to grade lower, and I think that's mostly because people are just like anything other than the bad ones is worthy of praise. And I'm kind of like, is it? But this one really blew me away. And I think that the reason for that is James Gunn. So we have to talk about James Gunn. Where do we start with James Gunn? Some people may hear his name right now and have a visceral reaction. He did get, I hate this term, but the big air quotes, canceled a few years ago and actually got booted out of the MCU as a writer and director after having done Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 for some controversial tweets that he made a long time ago. And yeah, they were bad. They didn't look good. And given the stranglehold that Disney has on its public image, it is no surprise to me that they fired him. However, it's pretty dumb because they clearly didn't know who they were hiring. For those of you unfamiliar, James Gunn used to direct for Troma. Troma is and was a very small production house that made, for the most part, lowbrow, discount, gory, sexual horror films or parody films. And he made a whole bunch of movies for them for years. And he was good at it. And they were really offensive. And they were also hilarious. So for them to dredge up some off-color tweets, clearly nobody looked further back than 2010. Because, James Gunn made some shit. With that context, that I'm not just bringing that up as like a defense to James Gunn, and I'm not even going to say I'm going to defend James Gunn, because even with that context, that shouldn't have happened. But he is a talented artist. He's a talented writer. He's a talented director. Obviously the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, both of them were extremely well received, even among the MCU films, and were generally fan favorites. And yeah, Gunn gets to go all out in this film. This film is, I don't look at ratings for films anymore. It's just not something I pay attention to. But you definitely notice pretty quickly that this film is a hard R. Like, no way in hell did they have any intention of getting this anywhere near a PG-13 rating. And that is great. Because one of my biggest gripes about Guardians 1 and 2 is that it feels like they feel like they're pretty good, but they feel like they're on the edge of brilliance and somebody's yanking on the leash. And this is the one where they just said, all right, James Gunn, you fucking mad dog, go for it. And they let go of the leash. And that's astonishing for Warner Brothers and DC to have given him this much freedom, but it is very apparent that they were like, please save us. Please save us from all of the terrible mistakes that the DC universe has been making for the last however many years. Please save us from ourselves. And boy, is he out here in flying colors. Is that the phrase? I don't know. It's just, the movie goes all out and it does not pull punches, and it is an absolute romp. And I know that's like a cliche movie reviewer thing to say, but it fucking is. This is I think the only superhero film I can think of that is unabashedly cartoony, top to bottom, does not take itself particularly seriously, but is also doing everything in absolute earnest, because it knows it's a comic book film. It knows it's cartoony. It knows the tone that it wants to go for, and it is going for it. I'm genuinely blown away with how much the writing was left to Gunn and whoever else, but it's got his writing style all over it, and that's not just to say that this is some dumb comic film either. It manages to simultaneously be the wild and crazy, enjoyable, hilarious, comedic film about a bunch of superheroes, but also have genuine moments of like tenderness and care and nuance woven in there. And all the tones are knitted together really, really well. There's a couple of parts where it stumbles a little bit in the pacing, especially sort of like, and it's mostly relegated towards one particular section of the film, but it's a stumble. It is not a fall. It's just sort of great. The cast, if you've watched the prior DC films, the cast is almost completely unique. Harley Quinn's in here mostly for continuity purposes, but that's not to say that she's only there for continuity purposes either. She still, holds her own, fits in with the team, works together with everyone, and it's great. She knits really well together. I think Margot Robbie is still a great choice for Harley Quinn. She nails the character. But I want to set her aside, despite how good she is, because of everything else. Because this film proves what I feel like I've been saying forever, which is that, and not just about superhero films, but things like Star Wars and all these other big IPs that feel like they have to be prestige all the time because they've been so successful. Which is to say that this film takes a bunch of like really D-list, you've never heard of them characters, and just absolutely makes them work, puts them to work in a great script that is letting them show off who they are and giving them freedom. There are, chunks of exposition, but I mean, if you're going to introduce however many new characters, you got to do it somehow. I give concession to all the exposition. It's done perfectly fine, even if it's a little bit heavy. So for them to get all these characters in, have me care about them, for them to have, each of them to have just like enough nuance to be characters into themselves, which, in the Suicide Squad film, that's the earlier one, not this one. The naming's going to be a problem, I tell you. There's no characters in that film. They're just a bunch of dour faces and people in costumes. This has a bunch of characters in it. And it doesn't go too far. It's not trying to make you love every single character. It's not trying to make them like, the character that you get attached to for the next 20 years. It's very sort of like okay with not driving home all of the shit that people making cinematic universes want to do, which is just like to hammer it home to make you invested. This film makes you invested, but it does it very naturally. The people have like genuine flaws and speak to each other in realistic ways and don't fall on superhero tropes or any of this other shit that much unless it's for comedy. And the comedy itself, again, to compare to Guardians, like most of the Guardians comedy is like quippy dialogue, and it has to be PG-13, and it works decently, but not nearly as well as it does in this film. Like, this is genuinely like there's so much depth added by just letting a whole bunch of characters talk to each other in unfiltered ways, and it works so well. And the team comes together so naturally, and you care about everybody for like natural reasons. It's never forced on you. They don't give you some sob story or whatever that like they do in so many other Marvel films and DC films and all that. It's like, you don't have to, yank my heartstrings that hard. Just give me a little. Just sprinkle a little bit of character in there, and I'm going to enjoy it. It's great. So credit to, tons of credit to Gunn and everybody else involved for sticking with it, for making something like kind of unique and different, for not being afraid to, take risks, to have a bunch of no-name characters and no-name villains, and like this weird setting that, the future of which is questionable, and just to go all out on it. In addition to the dialogue and the writing and the story, which all works really well and is, goes just as far as it needs to, the like cinematic aspect of it is also really good. I've always enjoyed Gunn's directing style. It's not always, the most cinematically polished, but like he does interesting things with the camera, has fun shots, does, weird cuts for context. And they're just fun. You have fun with it. If you watch, you see a bit of it in Guardians, but like here it's really on display. He's got a whole bunch of different cinematic styles that he plays with. It's a very playful sort of directorship, and I really appreciated that, especially when there's so many like. How many MCU films are we up to now? It's like 24 or something. Like so many of them just look so much the same. They're very, very by the book cinematography. And so just to have something that really sort of knits well cinematically with the fun, the fun nature of the story and the characters and the dialogue and and all these other aspects, it all works really well together. And that's an underrated thing. Like there's a lot of scenes in the MCU and even more in the DCEU, which are just kind of terrible, not because the scene is terrible, but because the way it is shot is completely antithetical to the story that what's on screen is actually trying to tell. Like where it's just framed like crap, and there's no intimacy, or there's no sense of grandeur, or there's no sense of playfulness. Whatever they're going for, they like flop because of problems with the cinematography. And this film is such a breath of fresh air as a result, because it's all in one. I generally have a great affinity as well for writer-directors. Not always, there's plenty of bad writer-directors, but because it also means they can create on screen what they imagined in their mind when they were writing it, which I think can often be a disconnect between writers and directors, between the writing staff and production staff, in terms of like interpreting somebody else's vision. And that's, we could get into how, the director is ultimately sort of in charge of what the vision is, and it's their interpretation of the writing. But still, like, clearly there is, when you have a writer-director synthesizing all aspects of the cinematic language together under sort of one mind, can go a long way. I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I have very little bad to say about it. Very little to critique about it. It's still cheesy, and if you were looking for some grand cinematic vision, or like to really go home with some incredible I don't know, some greater message or something like that, you might be disappointed, but like that's not what I came in for. I'm blown away by this. It's kind of fantastic. since I already touched on the cast a little bit, but I do want to give a whole bunch of credit. There's a couple of big names on this, notable names, and a whole bunch of more minor character actors who show up in this. And there's a ton of cameos, a ton. They're all over the place, both in speaking and non-speaking roles. So I want to like, in addition to Margot Robbie, you've got Idris Elba, big name. John Cena, pretty big name. There are, I don't even want to talk about a whole bunch of the other ones because it just has the potential to talk about the plot or the story or whatever. But keep your eye out for if you're anything like me and you enjoy the sort of ties between different movies and who's in them and who works with who often and those sorts of things. It's sort of fantastic to see a whole bunch of people from this thing or that thing show up again as cameos. And not like, I don't even like the term cameo because it feels sort of degrading. These are actual, for the most part, actual characters. There are some people who just like show up as a face. And it's great to see them too, It just like, it's a reminder on some level that there's an artistic family of sorts going on here. That like, that it's not all dour corporate sales bullshit. It's just kind of fun. I really liked this film. I might mellow on it with time, but having just come off watching it, 45 minutes ago, I think it's kind of fantastic. And I hope that it holds up in my mind because, ongoing. Because, I don't want to go too far, but it's probably near the top of my superhero films, my favorite superhero films list. I guess we'll see if that holds up. If I ever, decide that it goes completely different, I'll put it in the comments or something. But anyway, I had a good time and I wanted to share that, and I wanted to talk about James Gunn and Trauma and the DCEU and the MCU and all this shit. Let artists make art. Sometimes they make good stuff. Thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.